Chapter 8. On Tuesday, they again did their laundry. The product of their efforts this time looked only slightly grayer than it had the time before. Claudia's sweater was considerably shrunken. They knew that it was too early to get an answer to their letter, but they couldn't resist starting down to Grand Central Post Office to take a look anyway. It was noon by the time they stopped and ate breakfast at a chock-full old nuts on Madison Avenue. They dragged it out beyond the patience of the people who were standing waiting to occupy their seats. Both Claudia and Jamie almost didn't want to look at their box in the post office. As long as they didn't look, they still had hopes that they could find a letter there. They didn't. They strolled along the streets and found themselves near the United Nations building. Claudia stressed it to Jamie that they take the guided tour she had read about when she was studying the tour guide book of the American Automobiles uh, Association. Today we can learn everything about the UN. Jamie's first question was, how much? Claudia challenged him to walk in and find out. 50 cents each. They could go if Claudia was willing to skip dessert that afternoon. Jamie added, you know, you can't have your cake and take tours too. How about having tours and hot fudge sundaes too? Claudia asked. They stood in line and got tickets for a tour. The girl selling tickets smiled down at them. No school today? She asked casually. No, Jamie answered. The boiler on the furnace broke. No heat. They had to dismiss school. You should have heard the explosion. All the windows rattled. We thought it was an earthquake. 14 kids got cuts and abrasions, and their parents are suing the school to pay for their medical expenses. Well, it was about 10 in the morning. We had just finished our spelling lesson when the man behind Jamie, who was dressed in a derby hat and who looked more as if he belonged in the UN than visiting it, said, I say, what's holding up this line? I repeat, what is holding up this line? The girl gave Jamie the 2 tickets. As she did so, the man in the derby hat was already pushing his money onto the counter. The girl looked up Jamie and Claudia as they were leaving and said, well, is she couldn't finish her question. The man in the derby hat was scolding the girl. No wonder it takes the UN forever to get something done. I have never seen a line move more slowly. He only looked as if he belonged. He certainly didn't act it. The girl blushed as she gave the man his ticket. I hope you enjoy your tour, sir. She acted as if she belonged. Jamie and Claudia sat with other ticket holders, waiting for their numbers to be called. Claudia spoke softly to Jamie. You sure are a fast thinker. Where did you cook up that story about the furnace? I've had it ready and waiting ever since we left home. First chance I've had to use it, he answered. I thought I had thought of everything, Claudia said. That's okay. You are quite a kid. Thanks, Jamie smiled. The guide, who was calling the numbers, finally said, will the people holding tickets number 106 to 121 please go to the double doors on the wall opposite this desk. There your guide will begin your tour. Jamie and Claudia went. Their guide was an Indian girl who wore a sari and whose long hair was bound into a single braid that hung down her back to well below her waist. With one hand she lifted the folds of her sari. Her walk was favored by her costume. Her steps were short and light, and there appeared to be great movement around her knees. Claudia looked at her guide's skin and thought of smoky topaz, November, her mother's birthstone. She listened to her guide's accent and formed the sounds in her mind without listening to what the sounds said. Thus, when the tour was finished, Claudia was no expert on the United Nations, but she had discovered something. Saris are a way of being difficult. She could do 2 things, she decided. When she was grown, she could stay the way she was and move to some place like India where no one dressed as she did, or she could dress like someone else, the Indian guide even, and still live in an ordinary place like Greenwich. How did you like those earphones where you can tune in almost any old language at all, Jamie? Asked his sister. Pretty keen, huh? Claudia seemed to have a far-away look in her eye. Yes, she answered. It sounds like yes. Jamie inspected Claudia closely. She was holding one arm crooked and the other pressed against her stomach. Her step seemed shorter than usual and lighter than usual, and there appeared to be great movement around her knees. What's the matter with you? He asked. You got stomach cramps or something. Claudia lowered her eyes to him and said, Jamie, you know, you could go clear around the world and still come home wondering if the tuna fish sandwich at Chock-full o' Nuts still cost 35 cents. Is that what gave you stomach cramps? He asked. Oh, just give it, just give it. Claudia knew she would have to discover some other way to be different. Angel would help her somehow. Her hopes centered more than ever on Box 847 in the post office, and the following day, when they peeked through its little window, they saw an envelope. Claudia was prepared to be the discoverer of great truths. Greenwich's own heroine of the statue, and only 20 years old. Jamie was so excited that he could hardly get the key into the lock to open the box. Claudia waited while he opened it and the envelope too. He held the letter unfolded and off-centered so that they could read it together in silence. Saxonburg, I have here attached a copy of the actual letter which I have in my files. Dear friends of the museum, we sincerely thank you for your interest in trying to help us solve the mystery of the statue. We have long known of the clue you mentioned. In fact, that clue remains our strongest one in attributing this work to the master Michelangelo Buonarroti. Other evidence, however, is necessary, for it is known that Michelangelo did not carve all the marble blocks which were quarried for him and which bore his mark. We cannot ignore the possibility that the work may have been done by someone else, or that someone counterfeited the mark into the stone much later. We summarize the possibilities as follows. First, the work was designed and done by Michelangelo himself. Second, the work was designed by Michelangelo but done by someone else. 3. The work was neither designed or done by Michelangelo. Our hope, of course, is to find evidence to support the first of these three possibilities. Neither Count David nor Vasari, Michelangelo's biographers who knew him personally, mentioned a master carving this little angel. They mentioned only the angel carved for the altar in Siena. However, in a letter he wrote to his father from Rome on August 19, 1497, Michelangelo mentions, I bought a piece of marble I keep to myself, and I am sculpturing an image for my own pleasure. In the past, experts have believed the image which he sculptured for his own pleasure to be a cubit. Now we must examine the possibility that it was an angel. The problem of angel has now become a matter of consensus. 4 Americans, 2 Englishmen, and 1 German, all of whom are experts on the techniques of Michelangelo's, have thus far examined the statue. We are presently awaiting the arrival of 2 more experts from Florence, Italy. After all of these experts have examined the statue, we will write a summary of their opinions, which we will release to the press. We greatly appreciate your interest and would enjoy your disclosing further clues to us if you find them. Sincerely, Harold C. Lowery, Public Relations, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Claudia and Jamie walked from the post office to Grand Central Terminal and sat down in a waiting room. They sat perfectly quiet, disappointed beyond words. Claudia would have felt better if the letter had not been so polite. A nasty letter or a Sarcastic one can make you righteously angry, but what can you do about a polite letter of rejection? Nothing really, except to cry. So she did. Jemmy let her cry for a while. He sat there and fidgeted and counted number of benches. She still cried. He counted number of people on the benches. She was still at it. He calculated the number of people per bench.